The year is 1546. Human cartilage tears with a wet, fibrous snap. Ligaments stretch like rubber bands until they give way. Ball joints grind and pop as they are pulled from their sockets. A 25-year-old woman, Anne Askew, hears these sounds coming from her own body in the White Tower, London. She is strapped spread eagle to the rack. Her ankles swell purple. Her wrists bleed through the ropes. The two men about to destroy her body are not criminals or executioners, but the highest legal officers in the kingdom. Sir Thomas Wriothesley, the Lord Chancellor, and Sir Richard Rich, the Solicitor General. In the Tower's 900-year history, only 2 women were ever subjected to the rack. Anne Askew is one of them. What makes this story sickening is that when the professional torturer declared he could not do this anymore, England's top government officials threw off their velvet robes, rolled up their silk sleeves, and grabbed the handles themselves. Guards 3 floors up would later testify they could hear her screams, audible even from the gardens outside, over 200 feet away. Through the dislocations and ligament tears, she would not give them what they wanted. Anne was being tortured not for what she did, but for what she knew, and what she knew could execute a queen, reshape English history, and destroy the kingdom's most powerful people. Her silence was more dangerous than gunpowder. Her execution became England's greatest propaganda disaster, and when they finally burned her alive, her body was so destroyed from torture that they had to chain her corpse to the stake. Even in death, she could not stand on her own. Before the rack, one must understand the dying monster at the center of this nightmare. King Henry VIII. In January 1546, at 54, he looked 70. He weighed nearly 400 pounds and had a festering necrotic ulcer on his leg that doctors drained daily, removing approximately 1 pint of pus. The stench was indescribable, described as sweet and rotten simultaneously. Beneath the rotten rage, Henry's intelligence was sharp. He was obsessed with who would control England after his death. His heir, 9-year-old Prince Edward, was unprepared to rule. 2 factions circled. The Old Guard, led by Bishop Stephen Gardiner and the Duke of Norfolk, were conservative Catholics who saw the Protestant Reformation as a disease. And the Reformers, led by men like Edward Seymour, who wanted England to continue its Protestant path. The Reformers had an unlikely champion, the King's 6th wife, Queen Catherine Parr. Brilliant, educated and compassionate, Catherine had made Henry's twilight years bearable. But she harbored a secret. She was a committed Protestant. Her private chambers had become a haven for reform-minded women, where she hosted Bible study and translated religious texts. Bishop Gardiner saw an opportunity. If he could prove Catherine a heretic, he could destroy and execute her, just like Anne Boleyn. Conspiracies against queens required evidence, confessions, and names. They needed someone from her inner circle to break. Gardiner's spies identified what they thought was the perfect target: Anne Askew. Anne Askew was born in 1521 in Lincolnshire. She was minor nobility, expected to marry well and cause no trouble. But Anne could think. She could read Latin, Greek, and scripture. By age 12, she had read the Bible multiple times. By 15, she could argue theology. She notably rejected transubstantiation, the Catholic teaching that communion bread and wine literally become Christ's flesh and blood. She called it idolatry. Her family's solution was a substitute marriage. After her older sister Martha died, she was married to Thomas Kyme, a wealthy Catholic landowner. Kyme wanted a quiet, obedient wife. But he got Anne Askew instead. She refused communion. She argued with the local priest. She quoted scripture at dinner parties. The final straw came when Anne publicly refused communion at Mass. Thomas Kyme threw her out, depositing her on the road. Anne walked to London alone, 120 miles. There, she began preaching. Word spread fast in London's Protestant community about this young, brilliant and fearless woman who could quote scripture like a bishop. She began making connections with women in Queen Catherine's inner circle, including the Duchess of Suffolk and the Countess of Hertford. If Gardiner could get Anne to confess to heresy and name these women, he would have his evidence, a direct line to the Queen herself. In March 1545, they arrested her for heresy under the 6 Articles Act. This law made denying transubstantiation punishable by burning alive. They thought she would be easy to break, but she made Edmund Bonner, the Bishop of London, look like an idiot. For 5 days, Bonner questioned her, but when he tried theological traps, she quoted scripture back at him in Greek from memory. She expertly avoided being declared a heretic. Anne's cousin pulled strings and secured her release, but she immediately went right back to preaching. By June 1546, Bishop Gardiner was done playing games. This time, they sent Wriothesley and Rich. On June 18, 1546, armed guards arrested Anne and brought her to the Guildhall. Wriothesley demanded names, attempting to link her to the Queen's ladies. Anne calmly replied, quote, "I do not know what you mean," end quote. She refused to give them even a tiny thread to pull. Wriothesley, enraged, stood up. Quote, "Then you leave us no choice. We are sending you to the Tower of London. And there, Mistress Askew, we have methods that will loosen your tongue." Anne, unflinching, responded, "Then I pray God to strengthen me in his truth." That is when they realized she would rather die than break, and they decided to use the rack. The rack was a large wooden frame. What Wriothesley and Rich were about to do was illegal. It required the king's explicit written permission, and there was a prohibition against racking women. They had no permission. They just wanted their names. On June 19, 1546, Anne was strapped to the device. Wriothesley demanded names one more time. Anne remained silent. Wriothesley nodded. Thomas, the professional torturer, began to turn the handles. Anne's body stretched, the ropes went taut, and she began to scream. When her shoulders were pulling from their sockets, Sir Anthony Knevet, the lieutenant of the tower, risked his life. He declared, quote, "Stop. This is illegal. We do not have the king's warrant, and she is a woman. This is wrong," end quote. Knevet refused to continue. In an unprecedented act, Wriothesley and Rich threw off their robes. They grabbed a handle each and began to turn. Anne later wrote that the Lord Chancellor and Master Rich, quote, "took pains to rack me with their own hands till I was nigh dead," end quote. They turned the wheel beyond what Thomas had dared. Anne's screams reached a pitch that made guards on upper floors vomit. Her shoulders dislocated, her hips wrenched free, her pelvis cracked, and her elbows gave way. She lost consciousness, but they revived her with cold water and kept questioning. Through the agony, Anne managed to whisper, quote, "I know nothing," end quote. This went on for hours. Finally, Knevet left the chamber. He went straight to Henry VIII. He reported the Lord Chancellor's illegal act. Henry, shocked, immediately granted Knevet a pardon and sent orders to stop the torture. But by the time the orders arrived, Anne's body was catastrophically destroyed. She could not walk, she could not stand, she could not even sit upright. They carried her back to her cell, but for 2 more hours, Wriothesley sat beside her broken body, demanding names. She gave him nothing. Her will remained unbroken. The conspiracy against Queen Catherine Parr died in that cell. For the next month, Anne remained in the tower. Her mind was sharp. She spent those weeks writing on smuggled scraps of paper. She documented everything, including Wriothesley and Rich personally torturing her. Her writings began leaking out of the tower. They were passed through London's Protestant community and smuggled to printers in Europe. The cover-up was failing spectacularly. On July 16, 1546, the execution order came down for Smithfield. A crowd of thousands gathered. When Anne arrived, she was carried out of a cart in a chair because she could not support her own weight. The crowd went silent. They carried her to the wooden post and used chains around her waist to keep her upright. Even in death, she could not stand. In the crowd stood Wriothesley. A priest approached, offering a pardon from King Henry VIII if she would renounce her heretical beliefs. The priest held the pardon toward her. But Anne's voice carried across Smithfield. She said, quote, "I came not hither to deny my lord and master," end quote. She refused to even look at the papers again. They lit the fire. They had fastened a small bag of gunpowder to her chest as an act of mercy. Anne remained silent until the smoke filled her lungs and the flames reached her chest. And then she was gone. But they had already failed. Anne's smuggled writings, published as the Examinations of Anne Askew, became a bestseller across Protestant Europe. They detailed what England's highest legal officers had done to her. Anne Askew became one of Protestant England's greatest martyrs. She became a symbol of resistance and defiance. Queen Catherine Parr survived without Anne's confession and outlived Henry. Anne Askew saved a queen by enduring hell. Her legacy goes deeper. She was a woman who rejected her forced marriage. She traveled alone. She preached publicly. She debated bishops. And when the most powerful men in England tried to break her, she refused. Her silence on the rack and her refusal to name names is what makes her story timeless. Her torturers, Wriothesley and Rich, are remembered only as monsters. Anne is a symbol of courage. She proved that power is always more fragile than the human spirit. They could destroy her body and burn her alive, but they could not kill what she represented. And they never will. Anne Askew died on July 16, 1546. She was 25 years old, and her voice still speaks. If you want more powerful stories like this one, subscribe. The past still has a lot to say.